Have you ever wondered if you really are under divine protection? Perhaps you faced difficulties, moments when it seemed that everything was falling apart, and you began to doubt whether God was really on your side. The truth is that there are clear signs, proofs that often go unnoticed, that God's hand is at work in your life, protecting, guiding, and caring for you. What if I told you that unexpected failures, difficult decisions, and even that peace you feel in the midst of chaos are some of these proofs? Sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? After all, why would failures be divine intervention? But that's the beauty of God's protection. It doesn't always manifest itself in the way we expect. In this video, you will discover the 7 concrete proofs that you are under divine protection, and by knowing each one of them, your perception will change completely. You will begin to recognize the signs of God in your life, even in the most challenging situations. Get ready, because what comes next can change the way you face your struggles and your moments of uncertainty. Divine protection goes far beyond a simple physical shield. It is a complete security that involves the spirit and mind, guiding our daily decisions and giving us insight to face challenges. Imagine walking on a path full of forks, not knowing which direction to take. Now imagine feeling an invisible but safe hand guiding your steps, pulling you away from the traps your eyes can't see. This is the essence of divine protection. It acts as a compass that, even when the path seems hazy, directs us clearly. And this protection does not arise magically or randomly. It is the result of trust. Proverbs 3:5-6 teaches us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts, setting aside our own wisdom. This seems counterintuitive after all. Haven't we been taught to trust our own abilities? But the beauty here is in surrender. When we accept that our vision is limited, we make room for divine wisdom to guide us. And in doing so, we experience a peace that transcends understanding, even when problems persist around us. This protection manifests itself in unexpected ways. Have you ever noticed how some decisions that seemed brilliant suddenly fall apart? Often what we see as failures are actually divine interventions, diverting us from paths that could lead us away from the greater purpose. It is in these moments that divine protection really shines. It prevents us from following directions that could result in even more painful falls. By accepting this, we avoid resentment and embrace the confidence that if something didn't work out, it's because God is in store for us something better. That confidence is strengthened by faith. It is not just about believing in an abstract concept, but about living with the conviction that God is always present, guiding our steps. When you feel that trust, every decision, no matter how simple it may seem, becomes an opportunity to hear God's voice. And this voice, sometimes subtle, acts like an angel at our side, offering wisdom and protection even when we don't realize its presence. It is like a silent navigation system, avoiding invisible dangers. Finally, the peace that comes from this divine protection is one of its most powerful manifestations. Even when everything seems to be falling apart, this peace settles in like a guardian angel, calming our heart. Philippians 4:7 reminds us that this peace exceeds all human understanding. It makes no sense in the eyes of the world, but for those who trust in divine protection, it is a reminder that God is in control. This sense of security allows us to move forward, even in the midst of chaos, knowing that we are being guided by a greater force. And this strength is not limited to the present. Divine protection extends beyond what we can comprehend. That's why God's love is so essential in this equation. When we understand that we are loved unconditionally, without the need for proof or perfection, we realize that this protection is an extension of that love. A love that, even in the face of our mistakes and weaknesses, remains unshaken, guiding us with discernment, faith, and trust. Divine wisdom is a gift that goes far beyond human knowledge. It is as if God grants us a vision that transcends what is visible to the naked eye, allowing us to see what lies behind appearances and circumstances. In moments of doubt, this wisdom becomes a compass, guiding our choices and moving us away from dangers that we cannot identify on our own. Imagine being at a crossroads with multiple possible paths. God's wisdom is the map that leads us along the best path, even if, at first glance, it does not seem the most attractive. In daily decisions, small or large, this wisdom acts as a silent guide. Sometimes that soft voice within us that directs us to what is right is not simply our intuition. It is the presence of God showing us what we should do. When we are about to make a difficult decision, this voice directs us, even if the proposed path seems to be the most complicated or counterintuitive. That's where trust comes in. God doesn't just guide us to easy paths, but to those that mold us, challenge us, and prepare us for what's to come. This wisdom is also revealed in moments when life surprises us with difficulties. Rather than despairing in the face of challenges, God's wisdom allows us to see them as opportunities in disguise. What seems to be a barrier is often a stepping stone to something bigger. It's like the story of Joseph, who was sold into slavery but used that moment of pain as a lesson in faith and perseverance. Similarly, by relying on divine wisdom, we can transform moments of failure into moments of growth and discernment. But how to develop this wisdom? The first step is prayer and active seeking divine guidance. When we are faced with a difficult choice, we can stop and ask God to enlighten our minds and hearts. Some people find it helpful to keep a prayer journal, writing down their questions and the answers they feel over time. The practice of meditation on Scripture is also a way to attune our mind to God's wisdom. Passages like 1 Corinthians 10:13 are reminders that God will never leave us alone in our dilemmas, and His wisdom will always be available to guide us. Additionally, it is important to remember that God's wisdom is not just limited to big decisions. It is present in the small choices of everyday life. From how we treat those around us to how we respond to conflict situations, every moment is an opportunity to apply that wisdom. By acting with discernment, we can avoid future problems and often even open doors that we never imagined. Divine wisdom acts as a safety net, preventing us from falling into traps and always guiding us to the good. This safety net is what prepares us for the next step. Every decision based on God's wisdom strengthens our trust in Him and brings us closer to His purpose for our lives. And so, without realizing it, we are guided away from dangers and closer to our true mission. Faith, as we have already mentioned, is the essential element here. With every right choice, every wise decision, our faith grows, as does our ability to discern what is really important. Often, when we are faced with failure, the first reaction is frustration. After all, who likes to see their plans fall apart? But what few realize is that these moments, which initially seem like defeats, can be God's invisible hand protecting us from something we can't see. Have you ever stopped to think that that job you didn't get, or that relationship that ended may, in fact, have been divine intervention? God works in mysterious ways, and many of our failures are actually detours to keep us safe. The example of Joseph in the book of Genesis is one of the most powerful to illustrate this idea. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph could have sunk into despair. But as the years passed, he understood that what seemed to be a tragic failure was actually part of a larger plan. God was using that situation to mold him, prepare him, and eventually elevate him to a position of leadership in Egypt. In the same way, our unexpected failures can be preparation for something much greater that God has in store for us. Divine protection often manifests itself in moments when our plans do not work out. When a plan fails, we have two options: despair or trust. Faith comes into play as a shield, protecting our hearts from bitterness. Failure is not the end, but rather a chance to reflect and adjust our path. It is at this moment that we discern true divine wisdom. What seemed like a defeat may be God guiding us away from a trap we failed to foresee. Perhaps that business that didn't work out would have led to even greater losses, or that relationship that didn't materialize would have taken us away from God's purpose for our lives. Divine intervention acts in subtle ways, but always with the aim of protecting and strengthening us. And how to deal with these failures? Instead of looking at them with eyes of defeat, it's time to see them as opportunities for growth. A simple exercise that can help is to list the lessons that each failure brought. What skills have you developed? What new people did you meet? What doors opened while others closed? This practice helps us see divine intervention in action, recognizing that often failure is just a pause before something bigger. It's as if God is preparing us for success in a way that only He can understand. In addition, it is important to maintain a posture of gratitude, even in the face of failures. This does not mean denying the pain or pretending that everything is fine, but rather recognizing that deep down, God is taking care of us. Every obstacle overcome, every unexpected detour along the way is an opportunity for us to grow spiritually, strengthen our faith, and develop the discernment needed for the future. As we trust God more, these failures become less daunting and more a natural part of the journey. Unexpected failures, therefore, are an essential part of the walk of faith. They are not the end of the line, but rather curves in the path that God has laid out for us. The wisdom of recognizing this frees us from trying to control everything and allows us to live with more peace and confidence. This is where divine protection comes in. When we stop fighting failures and start seeing them as signs of God's care, our perspective changes completely. And of course, this prepares us for the angelic encounters and signs that are to come. The Bible is filled with accounts of angelic encounters and divine visions that occur at the most unexpected times. These supernatural events are clear manifestations that divine protection is always present, even when we cannot see it with our natural eyes. Angels, often described as messengers of God, appear in various biblical passages to offer encouragement, strength, and direction. A striking example is that of Daniel, who received a visit from an angel while praying for answers. The vision was so powerful that he was speechless, but at the same time, he felt an inexplicable peace. These encounters are not restricted to the pages of Scripture. Many people around the world, in times of dire need or despair, report feeling the presence of something greater. Sometimes, it can be that sense of security in a dangerous situation, or a sudden response to a dilemma that seemed unsolvable. At other times, it is as if a soft voice guides us, keeping us away from hasty decisions. These encounters don't have to be visible to be real. They are signs that God is taking care of us through His angels and His interventions. However, it is important to remember that our faith should not be based solely on supernatural signs. As mentioned in the video, these angelic encounters are gifts from God. But the foundation of our faith must be firmly rooted in His Word and our relationship with Christ. Faith, as 2 Corinthians 5:7 teaches, is to be lived by faith and not by sight. This means that while signs and encounters can strengthen our faith, they should not be the foundation. Our trust must be in God, who protects and guides us, even when we do not feel or see His action so clearly. Sometimes visions and angelic encounters come to show us that although we face difficulties, we are not alone. When Elijah was fleeing and felt completely defeated, God sent an angel to strengthen and encourage him to continue his journey. This same principle applies to us today. We may not physically see an angel by our side, but divine intervention is present, encouraging us not to give up, even when circumstances seem insurmountable. This assurance that God uses His angels to protect and guide us gives us renewed confidence in the midst of trials. However, it is also essential to develop discernment. because not every vision or sign comes from God. Divine protection includes the wisdom to discern between what is genuine and what can lead us astray. In the biblical story, Paul talks about false signs and miracles, and this is where the importance of always being connected to God's word comes in. When we are aligned with Scripture and pray for discernment, we are able to identify which encounters are truly divine. Thus, our faith is strengthened and we remain firm in our purpose, regardless of the challenges. These encounters and visions are ultimately powerful reminders that God is always present, caring for us in ways that go beyond what we can imagine. They remind us that divine protection is much more than physical. It is spiritual, emotional, and even mental. God manifests himself in many ways, and angels are one of those ways. But in addition to the angels, there is another gift that God gives us, a peace that surpasses all understanding, something we will discuss shortly. The peace that God offers us is unlike any kind of tranquility that the world can provide. It is a peace that often does not make sense in the midst of the difficulties we face, but is there constant, like an anchor in the midst of the storm. When everything seems to be falling apart, this peace gives us the serenity to continue. Philippians 4:7 describes this peace as something that surpasses all understanding because it does not depend on circumstances but on our trust in God. Imagine being in the center of a hurricane with the winds blowing hard around you, but in the midst of it feeling completely calm, knowing that divine protection is upon you. This peace does not deny the reality of problems, but strengthens us to face them with confidence. Rather than being consumed by anxiety or fear, we feel a deep tranquility, knowing that no matter what happens, God is in control. This is the true meaning of having peace in the midst of chaos. It is not the absence of challenges, but an unshakable certainty that God protects and guides us. And so, we are able to act with discernment, make the right choices, and even encourage others around us, showing them the confidence we have in divine intervention. In the most difficult moments of life, this peace may seem distant, but it is always accessible. A simple practice that helps to activate this feeling of peace is prayer. Not a prayer of despair, but a prayer of surrender, where we put all our anxieties and worries in God's hands. By doing so, we release control and allow God to work in our lives. Often this peace manifests itself in unexpected ways. It could be a word of comfort from a friend, a verse we read and resonate in our hearts, or even a sense of calm that comes out of nowhere. All these are clear signs of divine protection and care. This peace also teaches us something very valuable. Failure is not an enemy. When we have peace, even unexpected failures become easier to cope with. Divine intervention can be seen not only in what works, but also in things that don't go as planned. God transforms adverse situations into opportunities for growth, and the peace we feel in the midst of these circumstances is a reminder that He is present, shaping our lives for something greater. It's as if each failure were a piece of a puzzle, which, in the end, results in something much more beautiful than we could imagine. Moreover, this peace is a tangible demonstration of God's unwavering love. When we feel like everything is out of control, it's God's love that brings us back to the center. Romans 8:38-39 reminds us that nothing can separate us from this love, not adversity, not failure, not challenges. That love sustains and strengthens us, and the peace we experience is a direct extension of that love. Each time we feel that peace, it's as if God is hugging us and saying, "I'm here. You're not alone." This allows us to face any situation with the confidence that we are under divine protection. And this protection doesn't stop there. The peace God gives us is just a reflection of something much greater, His unwavering love and acceptance. Even when we fail, when we make mistakes, God does not abandon us. He continues to guide us, protect us, and give us the strength we need to keep going. This certainty is what prepares us to experience even more deeply the unconditional love of God, something we will see below. God's love is one of the most powerful and constant forces we can experience in our lives. It is a love that is not shaken by our failures, that does not depend on our perfection or our achievements. This love is the basis of all divine protection, because it is through it that we are guided, sustained, and accepted just as we are. Romans 8:38-39 reminds us that nothing can separate us from this love. Not death, not life, not angels, not adversity. This unconditional love allows us to walk with confidence, knowing that no matter what happens, God is by our side, offering His protection. This love frees us from the fear of failure. When we understand that God's love for us does not depend on our performance, we can face life's challenges with a lightness that we did not have before. We don't need to prove anything to God, for His love is already secured. It's like a father who loves his children unconditionally, no matter how many mistakes they make. This love is what allows us to move forward, even after failures and disappointments. He gives us the assurance that even if everything around us falls apart, God's love remains steadfast, guiding us back to the right path. In addition to offering us protection and peace, God's love also empowers us to love others in the same way. When we experience this divine love, we understand that acceptance is not based on worthiness, but rather on grace. This changes the way we deal with the people around us. We begin to see others with more compassion and patience because we understand that we are also accepted, despite our flaws. This love becomes a model for our relationships, teaching us to forgive, to welcome, and to reach out, even when the situation seems complicated. And this love is not just a passing emotion. He is an active force that transforms our lives. When we are aware of this love, our decisions change. We start to seek more discernment, more wisdom, because we know that we are being guided by a loving hand that only wants our good. God's love does not leave us in the same place. He pushes us to be better, to grow, and to live a life that reflects His presence in us. This love is like a flame that never goes out, always warming us and guiding us through the darkest moments. Another powerful aspect of God's love is that it protects us from ourselves. Often, we are our own biggest critics, imposing impossible expectations and condemning ourselves for every mistake. But when we understand that God loves us unconditionally, it frees us from this destructive self-criticism. We come to accept that we are human, flawed, but also deeply loved. It gives us the strength to keep going, even when circumstances are difficult, knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of perfection on our shoulders. And it is this love, this unwavering acceptance, that prepares us for the next stage of our journey. When we surrender to this love, we experience a peace that allows us to face any challenge, knowing that divine intervention is always present. God's love empowers us to move forward, confident that even in the midst of failure, there is always protection, wisdom, and most of all, a higher purpose at work. Trust in God is one of the fundamental pillars to experience His protection in a complete way. Often we find ourselves in situations where everything around us seems uncertain, and the first impulse is to try to figure everything out on our own. However, it is in these moments of uncertainty that we are called to fully trust in God. Trust goes beyond expecting immediate results. It is about surrendering our worries and anxieties to Him, believing that His will is perfect, even if we do not understand what is happening. God's protection is manifested when we put our trust in Him, knowing that God sees what we don't see. In Proverbs 3:5-6, the Bible exhorts us not to lean on our own understanding, but to trust in the Lord with all our hearts. This sounds simple, but in practice, trusting can be one of the biggest challenges, especially when we face moments of loss or failure. However, as we put our trust in God, we experience a peace that goes beyond human logic. It is the certainty that, even when we do not see solutions, God is acting on our behalf. Trusting in divine protection does not mean that we will not experience difficulties, but that, in the midst of them, God is present, guiding us. Often this confidence develops gradually. Like a muscle, it needs to be exercised in order to grow. A good example is the life of Abraham, which was tested several times. When God asked him to sacrifice his son, Isaac, Abraham did not hesitate. He fully trusted that God had a plan, even when the request seemed absurd in his eyes. That kind of confidence is what allows us to move forward, even when the immediate results aren't what we expected. Divine protection is always present, but it takes faith and trust to see it in times of crisis. In practice, cultivating this trust can start with small actions. On a daily basis, we can practice surrendering to God in situations that seem to be out of our control. This can be done through prayer and reading the scriptures, where we find accounts of how God cared for his people, even in the most difficult times. A helpful exercise is to write down a list of concerns and pray specifically about each of them, placing them in God's hands. Over time, we will see that trusting him is a process that brings peace and strengthens our faith as we perceive his protection in our lives. Trust also protects us from making rash decisions. When we are anxious or insecure, we tend to act impulsively, seeking quick solutions that are not always the best. By trusting in divine protection, we learn to wait in God's timing, which is often different from our own. This waiting can be difficult, but it is in it that our faith is shaped. Psalm 27:14 encourages us to wait on the Lord with courage, and that waiting is rewarded with the fulfillment of God's perfect plan in our lives. Trust brings patience, and patience teaches us to see divine care in every detail. Finally, trust in God gives us the strength to face the unknown. Often, life presents us with unexpected challenges that leave us groundless. But it is in these moments that trust in divine protection shines brightest. We know that even if we don't understand it now, God is working for our good, protecting and guiding us. This assurance strengthens us, gives us peace, and prepares us for the next chapter, which is often even better than what we could have imagined. And it is precisely this confidence that opens us to experience the daily miracles that God puts in our path. When we find ourselves in crises, whether emotional, financial, or spiritual, we often feel that we are alone, with no way out. However, it is exactly in these moments of greatest vulnerability that divine intervention becomes clearer and more present. God does not abandon us in the midst of chaos. On the contrary, it is in these moments that he works most evidently, sustaining us and guiding us to the right path. Divine protection in crises manifests itself in ways that we often only realize when we look back and see how we have been preserved from wrong choices or situations that could have destroyed us. The Bible is filled with examples of how God intervened in times of crisis to protect his people. One of the most striking examples is that of Moses and the Israelites at the Red Sea. Surrounded by the Egyptians and with no visible way out, God parted the sea, proving that even in the most desperate situations, he can create a path where there seems to be none. This intervention was a clear symbol of divine protection in action. Just as God did with the Israelites, he continues to intervene in our personal crises, opening doors and giving us solutions that once seemed impossible. When we are in crisis, it is easy to get lost in fear and anxiety. However, it is precisely at these times that we must remember that divine intervention does not fail. God uses every circumstance, no matter how difficult it may seem, to mold us and guide us back to His purpose. A practical exercise for times of crisis is the practice of focused prayer. Setting aside a specific time of day to talk to God, giving Him every detail of what is causing affliction, is a way of allowing Him to intervene in our situation. Often in doing so, we find peace and discernment to deal with what once seemed insurmountable. Another important point to consider is that many times divine intervention comes disguised as people around us. Friends, family, or even strangers can be instruments used by God to help us in times of crisis. A practical example of this is when, in a difficult financial situation, an unexpected job opportunity arises or someone offers help. These interventions may seem like coincidences, but they are actually God moving the right pieces to protect and sustain us through the storm. Knowing how to recognize these interventions is essential to strengthen our faith. In addition, it is important to realize that divine intervention does not mean the absence of difficulties. In fact, God allows us to go through crises so that we can grow and become stronger. The Apostle Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12:9, talks about how God's power is made perfect in weakness. It is during the moments of greatest fragility that divine intervention becomes most visible, because it is when we realize that, alone, we do not have control. Understanding this helps us to accept challenges with a new perspective, knowing that every crisis brings with it an opportunity to see God work powerfully in our lives. And at the end of each crisis, when we look back, we realize that divine intervention was present all along, even when we couldn't see it. God transforms every situation of pain into an opportunity for growth, and His interventions protect us from damage that we often cannot even comprehend. Divine intervention is therefore a constant reminder that we are not alone, even in the darkest of times. And as we recognize this, we are led to trust even more in God's loving care, which prepares us to face what is to come. Faith is the foundation that sustains our spiritual life and allows us to experience divine protection fully. Without faith, God's protection may seem distant or even non-existent. But when we trust Him, we realize that His hand is always upon us, guiding and protecting. Faith is not just an intellectual belief, but an unshakable confidence that God is in control, even when circumstances seem to contradict that truth. It is this trust that gives us the strength to continue, knowing that, despite adversity, we are always under God's watchful eye. Faith manifests itself in our lives in a variety of ways. Often, it's that inner voice that tells us to move on, even when there are no visible signs that things are going to get better. Other times, it is the sense of peace we feel in the midst of a storm, a peace that makes no sense to the world, but which we know is the fruit of our trust in God. Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as the assurance of the things we hope for and the evidence of the things we do not see. This assurance gives us the courage to keep going, knowing that divine protection is always present, even if we cannot see it with our physical eyes. And faith is not something we develop overnight. It is built over time as we face challenges and see God's hand at work in our lives. Every difficult situation we overcome with God's help strengthens our faith, allowing us to trust Him even more next time. A practical exercise to develop this faith is the practice of gratitude. By remembering and recording the times when God protected and guided us, we can look back and see how divine intervention was present in moments that, at the time, seemed insoluble. In addition, faith allows us to see God's purpose in situations that would otherwise seem meaningless. Often, we go through difficult circumstances that make us question whether God is really protecting us. But faith gives us the ability to trust that even in these situations, God is at work. A practical example of this is when we face a loss, whether it's a job or a loved one. Faith sustains us and helps us believe that while the pain is real, God is working to transform this situation into something that will contribute to our growth and the greater good. Faith also protects us from the traps of doubt and fear. When our trust is firmly rooted in God, we are less likely to fall into the traps of insecurity and despair. Fear tries to convince us that we are alone, that there is no way out, but faith reminds us that God is always in control. It's like walking down a dark path, but knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Even if we can't see that light right away, faith gives us the assurance that it's there, waiting for us, and that divine protection will guide us to it. Finally, faith is what connects us directly to divine protection. It is like an invisible shield that protects us from the storms of life. By holding our faith firm, we are positioning ourselves to receive all the care, wisdom, and divine intervention that God has for us. This faith not only protects us, but also transforms us, making us stronger and more resilient in the face of adversity. And it is through it that we can deeply experience divine protection in our lives, regardless of the circumstances. Have you been able to recognize any of these signs in your life? Maybe some of them are already present, but you hadn't noticed it yet. The fact is that divine protection is constantly surrounding us, even in the most difficult moments. And now that you know these 7 tests, how about starting to apply them in your daily life? How can you strengthen your trust in God, especially in times of crisis? What can you change in your routine to develop more faith and recognize divine intervention in your journey? Now it's your turn to act. How about taking a moment today to reflect on the situations in which God has already protected you, even if you didn't realize it at the time? And more importantly, how are you going to allow that protection to continue shaping your path going forward? Don't forget, God is always by your side, and His protection is there, even when you think you're alone. If you want to continue learning about how divine protection can transform your life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming content that can help you live a more connected life with God and His will. Share this video with someone who also needs to hear this message, and let's spread this truth together.